Good evening and welcome to our Wednesday evening slot, a live webinar where we reflect on some pretty amazing holy women in the Celtic spiritual tradition. And this evening I'm sharing with you about another great Celtic woman, a woman that I've never heard of before, Saint Gobnait. But first, before we begin, I would like to welcome those of you who've logged in and joined me, and I see that we have our regular Sister Sue, and it's lovely to have you. And here it's been raining rather heavy, which is good because it's been a lovely day and we've needed the rain. So let us just reflect for a moment and just come into our heart. And ask for the mindset of this Celtic holy woman, Saint Gobnait, that her spirit will empower us to reflect on the words that we share with you this evening, and that we may be more alive in our spirit, in our service to the divine. And my readings this evening are shared by two amazing women, Bridget Mary Meehan and Regina Madonna Oliver, in their book Praying with Celtic Holy Women. And as I've explained, we're talking this evening about Saint Gobnait of Ballyurnie, God-seeker and pursuer of justice. But first, in Sirach chapter 11, verses 1 to 3, we read, "The wisdom of the humble lifts their heads high and seats them among the great. Do not praise individuals for their good looks or loathe anyone because of appearance alone. The bee is small among flying creatures, but what it produces is the best of sweet things." Isn't that beautiful? So the notes along the way read, Saint Gobnait came to our attention quite by accident, or should we say by divine providence. At a retreat centre in Cork, when fellow retreatants heard of our plan to travel to a nearby beauty spot, Gobnait, County Cork, where mountains and a lake meet in a luxuriant valley. If you're going there, they said, you should go to Ballyvurney to Gobnait Shrine. Gobnait is a saint greatly revered in the immediate vicinity of Ballyvurney, but not well known or chronicled beyond her part of County Cork near Macroon. And I know Macroon quite well because I drove through it, or we drove through it, on my way back to visit the monastery where I spent a number of years, but I'd never heard of Ballyvurney. So I'm quite interested and excited about this. Our journey took us over circuitous country roads until, with some pointing by local residents and a few false turns, we saw signs for a holy well off to the right, and guideposts indicating that a little further on would be a cemetery, chapel, shrine, and additional holy wells sacred to this local saint. At the top of a hill and to the left was a modern cemetery guarded by a large white statue of Gobnait and a marker indicating what had been Gobnait's house. Praying the rosary there, we met a local woman named Gobnait Abina, who comes daily to pray at her patron's shrine. Across the road on the right lies a more ancient cemetery, where the grave of the 7th century saint is clearly marked. Here also are the walls of her chapel, still intact. The shrine keeper, Donald O'Herlihy, who faithfully oversees the care of the property, filled us in on the details we might otherwise have missed. The O'Herlihy family, we learned as leaders of the clan, were entrusted with this duty of care from earliest times, and have continued it faithfully to this present day. Built originally in Gobnait's time, local citizens in the 12th century restored the chapel to its present state, replacing toppled stones. It is quite sturdy, with arched window and door openings, but without a roof. The wooden roof, Mr. O'Herlihy explained, had been removed in the 1600s by local residents to protect the structure from burning by Cromwell's raiders, and to save the edifice from being used as a stable for horses. The timbers they hid behind a large rock in a nearby field, and although the lumber has long since rotted, the rock is still spoken of fondly as the Rock of the Wood. A little pamphlet called St. Gobnait of Ballyvourney by Ellis O'Daly or Ellis O'Daly is available in a local convenience store in the present day of the present town of Ballyvourney for a little over €1. It narrates several stories about Gobnait and includes a map of her shrine area with instructions for making the rounds, an ancient pious practice undertaken by pilgrims even to the present day. Little is written of this holy woman Gobnait in most of the sources that refer to the Celtic saints. In her own Ballyvourney, County Cork, however, Gobnait is still quite prominent. Many women of the area bear her name or that of her sister Abina, or both together. A long-held oral tradition says that her sister Abina joined Gobnait's community as one of her nuns. However, the name Abina may just be a version of Gobnait's name, since Abby, Abigail, and Deborah are cited as English versions of her name. Deborah is the equivalent of Gobnait in Gaelic, which means honey bee. What a lovely name, honey bee. Gobnait was not a native of Ballyvourney. She came there from far away, so the story goes. One tradition claims that her father was a pirate and that she docked at Fiontraig, where an angel appeared to her telling her not to return to the ship, but rather to journey to a place that she would see 9 white deer grazing, and at that spot she was to establish a monastic settlement. The Martyrology of Donegal speaks of her as the Virgin in the Big Bogland in the south of Ireland, where one can find her cell, or in brackets, church or cell. Inhabitants of Inisheer in the Aran Islands tell a different story. They claim that Gobnait spent time on their island and that she'd come from the cliffs of Moher across the sea to escape some unnamed but dangerous threat to her well-being. They maintain that it was at their church, Kilgrath and Dobain, and that she was visited by the angel. From here, they say, she left for the mainland, travelling clockwise southward to Ballygran, where there is a holy well in the graveyard in Kilshannig, honouring a Saint Abbey, an English form of the word Gobnait. Some believe that Saint Abbey was also known as Abigail and Saint Gobnait were the same person. Others maintain that Abbey and Gobnait were two different people. From there, Gobnait crossed Blackwater and traversed the Boggara Mountains, stopping near Macroom, where she saw 3 white deer. But this was not the prophesied number she was looking for, so she continued her journey onto Killeen. There she saw 6 deer. But again she did not fulfill the angel's words. She went further southward. You've got to admire her persistence. Across the Solane River and up a wooded hill, she saw them, 9 white deer, grazing. This was the spot called Gort na Teobraton. Here she built for herself a simple cell and prayed in gratitude to God, who had led her to her place of resurrection, the place where she would spend her life and give her life to God as a monastic and there die in that place. Young girls came to her seeking to take the white veil as members of her community. Around her circular stone house, they built clusters of wattle huts with enclosures of stone as cells for the members of this little community. They herded sheep and cows, made butter and bread, and kept a hive of bees. Gobnait was reputed to be a masterful beekeeper. It was a self-supporting settlement, including limited amount of metal and bronze workmanship among its craft output. Vegetables and wild berries added to their daily fare, and their main meal they shared each evening. This little community was an integral part of the larger surrounding community, giving their neighbors special care, and particularly ministering to those who were sick or in need. In true Celtic tradition, Gobnait sought guidance from an Anankara, Saint Aban, whose church was a quarter of a mile from her settlement. Just excuse me. Thirsty work reading, isn't it? Several miracles are attributed to Gobnait, and these were performed in service to the people of Ballyvourney. A band of cattle thieves attempted to steal the cattle of the neighbourhood, but Gobnait let loose a swarm of bees, and the robbers abandoned their rustling in terror. Another time, an enemy began to build a defence on a high rock, intending to control the vicinity and its people by his armed power. The legend says that Gobnait hurled her heavy agate bowl at the edifice boomerang-like and reduced it to rubble. God, she must have been strong. Again and again she repeated her attack every time the enemy attempted to rebuild. Her attack every time, until finally he abandoned his effort in dismay and got the message and left the territory. This bowl or bulla is kept sealed in a cavity in the south corner of the west gable of her church, and is one of the places where pilgrims stop to pray during their making of the rounds. On another occasion, Gobnait is credited with stopping the plague through her prayer and fasting. Clearly a very holy woman, a simple woman, but a woman who suffered fools not gladly. Now, caretaker Donald O'Herlihy pointed out 2 significant carvings in the stone of Gobnait's church that we might otherwise have missed. One was a Sheila na Jig, a fertility symbol, which seems to have survived its pagan inception to convey, as a Christian symbol, the church as the womb which enfolds us. This is carved into the stone at the arch of one of the church's windows. The second is a face carved in a stone in the facade above the chancel. It is said to be the face of one of the stonemasons employed to build that church. One night he stole a horse and a set of mason's tools and set off at a gallop to escape with his booty. On and on he galloped at a furious pace to put as much distance as possible between himself and Ballyvourney before dawn. But much to his consternation, as the sun rose, he found he was still outside Gobnait's church. He had been circling it at a gallop all night long. How disappointing for him. The penalty for his offence was that his image was cut in stone and enshrined above the chancel arch of the church. No one knows for sure how long Gobnait's monastery endured. It may have continued to function well into the 12th century or beyond. The fact that the O'Herlihy family were and still are its caretakers suggests that it had a long life in the community of Ballyvourney. Even when the O'Herlihy's lands were confiscated and given over to a Protestant overlord, and when the land where the shrine is located became non-Catholic property, devotion to this holy place continued. There is no record of the shrine's state of closure, but it would have ultimately suffered extinction either under the Suppression Act of Henry VIII or with the anti-Catholic activity of the Puritan era. Amazingly, for the 400 to 500 years that have passed since those historical events, the people of Ballyvourney have saved, supported, and held sacred their shrine and the memory of Gobnait, a 7th century heroine and holy woman. An oaken statue of Gobnait from the 13th century was given to the local church by the O'Herlihy family in 1843 and is still exposed for veneration on festive celebrations in her honour. Gobnait's intercession is especially sought for by parents of mentally and physically disabled children. Gobnait's feast day is celebrated on February the 11th, which is fittingly is also World Day of the Sick, as well as close to St. Bridget's feast day on February the 1st. St. Gobnait's Day marks the start of spring, the time for planting, and was celebrated with much festivity as a local holiday. A general pilgrimage is also held nearer to Easter when the weather allows greater numbers to participate. The prayer for the day reads in translation, O Gobnait, bring us safely through the coming year and save us from every harm and infirmity and from smallpox. A pilgrim to the shrine customarily visits several sites on the premises, and we have Gobnait's house, an area designed near her statue, Gobnait's grave, the church interior, the priest's grave to the side of the church, and the holy well at the bottom of the hill. At each site, prayers are recited, 7 Our Fathers, 7 Hail Marys, and 7 Glory Bees, and the final prayer is a traditional one. May God and Mary bless you, O holy Gobnait. I bless you too and come to you in my need. Please cure me for God's sake. Please come to my aid. Wow. What an amazing woman and an amazing journey. And before we conclude, there's a lot more to read, but we'll just skip that for now. And we'll just look at the questions for reflection and discussion before the meditation. How did Gobnait exemplify a healthy balance between contemplative prayer and activist intervention. Have you struck such a balance in your spirituality? How did Gobnait express a loving concern for her neighbours? Do you intervene for those you meet who have serious problems? What have you been able to accomplish for them? Thank God for the efforts and the victories. Pray for those who still need help. How are you doing as a listener to God's instructions? Have you followed in any decisive way God's leading for your life? Like Gobnait, how can you pursue justice for the oppressed? And finally, pilgrims who visit St. Gobnait's shrine sometimes rub a piece of cloth near the cavity where Gobnait's bowl is sealed. They then put this cloth on the place that needs healing. What healing are you in need of now? Is it physical, psychological, or spiritual? So let us, just for a minute or two, take time to be still and to enlist the support of St. Gobnait. Just relax. Find a place of stillness and peace. You may wish to come into our monastery garden and sit with us where it is peaceful and serene, or you may choose to sit somewhere near home. Be still now. Be still. And just allow your thoughts go back to those ancient times, back in the 7th century. And just visualize walking along a narrow country lane up a steep hill to find the well of Gobnait. But instead you find the ruins of the church and the monastery. And there's a sign saying, "Shortcut to the well." And you take the shortcut, and as you walk along this narrow country lane, you're aware of the beauty of the place, the stillness, the quietness, and it is a beautiful sunny day, and you are aware that you're nearing this sacred well, a well where its healing waters have touched many lives. And as you come to this well, you call on St. Gobnait, and she invites your heart to place your hands in the healing water, and you bring the water to your mouth, having formed a cup with your hands. And you taste the water, and it's pure, fresh water, like nothing you've ever tasted before. It is cool, it is healing. And having placed it to your mouth, you become aware of an energy, a surge of love, flow through your mind, your body and spirit. And it's overwhelming you. So you decide to sit by the well and just reflect. And in reflection, you call on St. Gobnait, and you ask her to intercede for you and your loved ones. You become aware of her presence. You become aware that she was truly a spiritual woman who knew hard times. And we reflect on her prayer, her opening prayer. Saint Gobnait, pursuer of justice for people who are oppressed by the powerful, inspire us to speak out when people suffer neglect and abuse in our society. Give us courage to act justly and work collaboratively to change systems that keep people poor and marginalized in our world today. May we realize that we can do all things by the power of the Spirit working in us. Excuse me. And here we're guided to read a passage from Isaiah chapter 58, verses 5 to 8. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down and head like a pearl rush, and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to God? Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice and undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin, then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Recall individuals, communities, and nations who suffer from poverty, disease, and discrimination. Ask God to guide you to do one activity that will serve their needs. Make a specific plan to accomplish that service. Put prayer into action today by doing one loving thing for one of those God calls your neighbors. Do this in the spirit of Gobnait, who was an activist when it came to serving her neighbors' needs. Gobnait was one who listened to God's message and then steadfastly pursued God's instructions. Today, practice this kind of listening. Open yourself to hear what God is telling you. Use simple words of invitation. For example, speak to me, O God. I am your listening servant. Guide me along the path of justice. Give me the courage to say yes to your will. And we conclude with the closing prayer to Saint Gobnait. Saint Gobnait, open our eyes to the needs of people who face hunger, homelessness, poverty, and oppressive domination. Pray for us that we may have the courage and strength we need to lighten the load that our sisters and brothers carry. For we are the hands and feet of God on earth. Amen. And the final blessing, may God, Mary, and Holy Gobnait be with us now and stay with us always. May they greet us warmly when we reach our heavenly home. Then in the company of the angels and the saints, we will clap our hands and sing for joy with all God's family, free and whole at last from suffering and injustice. Thank God we are free at last. May it be so. May it be so. I would like to thank you for giving up your time to listen to this story of an amazing holy Celtic woman, Saint Gobnait. And the next time we meet, we look at Saint Dimna of Achill Island, the survivor and the healer. So I bid you Bannacht, an Irish word which means blessing. I bless the ground you stand on, the ground you kneel to pray. And may your God, Goddess, empower you this night to reclaim your divinity as a child of God. God bless you and thank you. Namaste, Shalom, Inshallah, Pax et Bonum, OmShanti, Solo de Caritas, Salam Alaikum. Peace. The peace of God in all its richness be in your heart this night and every night.